Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I am Preeti Maurya, a PhD scholar from SNCWS, Jamia Millia Islamia. I welcome you all to Technical Session 6, titled Intersection of Islamic Feminism with Decolonial Thought. I will walk you through the initial instructions which had been passed on in the WhatsApp group, but I'll reiterate. Each of the presenters will get 10 minutes to speak. At the end of 8 minutes, we will remind you that you have 2 minutes left to conclude. Post post the presentations, we will have a Q&A sessions. All the participants are encouraged to post their questions in the chat box, and from the chat box we will pick up the question for the Q&A session. And I also request everybody to please turn on their camera so that this session becomes more interactive and we can see each other. Kulsum?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Kulsum Latifi. I'm a PhD research scholar in SNCWS Jamia Millia Islamia. Now I will introduce our chair, Dr. Sajoddin Nijamuddin Chaparban. Dr. Sajoddin is an assistant professor at the Center for Diaspora Studies, Central University of Gujarat. He has served as a visiting fellow at universities in the USA, Iran, and other countries. His research focuses on diaspora studies, migration, cultural history, and post 9/11 literature. He has authored and edited books including The Muslim Rights Back 2022 and Gender, Culture, and Identity 2021. Now, I will welcome our first participant, Dr. Zehra. Dr. Zehra, please unmute yourself, Dr. Zehra.
Hello everyone. I am here. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah.
Can I start?
Yes, Dr. Zahra, you may go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I share my PowerPoint file. And please let me to share my PowerPoint.
You can share it, ma'am.
9. Okay.
Are you able to share?
Okay. Yes. Can you see my PDF file, my PowerPoint file?
Yes, we can see your
Yes.
PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay. Hello everyone. It is an honor to address this conference on the crucial project of Islamic feminism, a movement born from the necessary and vital impulse to decolonize and reread the Quran, seeking justice within our own religious tradition. The goal of Islamic feminism is clear: to dismantle patriarchal authority that has accumulated over centuries of interpretation. However, I stand here today to pose an uncomfortable question. Why does Islamic feminism, despite its powerful decolonial ambitions, frequently fail to truly decolonize the cortex, namely the Quran? My argument is that the current epistemological framework of the movement often falls short of its stated goals. By neglecting a rigorous and historically grounded methodology, much of this scholarship inadvertently reproduces the very male-centered authority it seeks to dismantle. The power of the text is not truly questioned, but merely redressed in a new ideological outfit. In the following, I will first examine the historical context of the Quran. Subsequently, I will address the critique of timelessness methodology presented by some Muslim feminists. I wanted to go to the next page, but I can't. Can you help me?
Dr. Zara, can you move your slide?
Uh, I want to share. I want to go to the next page of my presentation, my file, but I cannot.
Preeti, can you check if she has the control?
No, ma'am, we do not have the control. Dr. Zahra, you can go to the PPT, the Microsoft PPT that you have opened, the app itself on your laptop. From there, you can move it.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's moving.
move.
It's moving. And you
Okay,
can also make it a slideshow.
okay. I have a lot of problem.
It's all right, ma'am. I think we can see
Okay.
actually without the
We can see
presentation.
your slide and it is moving. We can see the second slide now, Dr. Zahra.
Okay. The historical pivot from matrilineally to patriarchal in the Hejaz. To understand the core argument, namely, why the methodology of Islamic feminism is flawed, we must first firmly situate the Quran in its original and dynamic historical reality. Too often, we discuss the text in an intellectual vacuum, separated from the deeply contested social and political landscape of 7th century Arabia. Contrary to the common assumption of an external and monolithic patriarchy, pre-Islamic Arabian society was a complex environment that recognized significant female power. Various studies highlight the crucial role of matrilineal structures, where political leadership was often a central manifestation of female authority. We find evidence of influential warrior queens and priestess queens across both North and South Arabia. This was not a minor feature. It demonstrates a resilience and a strength of female leadership across political, military, and religious domains in late antiquity. This indigenous female power was also deeply reflected in the spiritual life of the Arabs. Arabian paganism was rich with powerful feminine divinities, such as Arabian goddesses like Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. Female power, therefore, was central to the spiritual and social fabric of the Hejaz. However, this society was in the midst of profound and rapid transformation. Beginning in the 5th and 6th centuries, the peninsula began to experience a series of powerful pressures that fundamentally undermined these ancient matrilineal structures. This internal shift was driven by the mercantile impulse, the rise of urban centers, and an elite trading class, which brought rapid economic change and urbanization. This internal transformation was intensely accelerated by external pressures. Diplomatic, military, and confessional exchanges rippling out from the Byzantine, Persian, and Achaemenid empires. The crucial consequence of this convergence was the influx of powerful Abrahamic traditions and the adoption of external Roman and Iranian legal blueprints. These traditions universally favored a new and centralized and strictly patriarchal form of governance. As men in the rising urban elite sought to secure and transmit their new wealth and political power to future generations, there was a concrete, powerful, and necessary effort to eradicate the political, economic, and religious influence that women had traditionally held. This monumental shift marked a forceful transition away from matrilineal past toward a solidifying patriarchal system. It is precisely in this moment of contested transition that the Quran is revealed. Scholars observe that the Quran did not emerge as an ideological outsider opposing the rising tide of patriarchy. Rather, it played a
Dr.
vital
Zehra, you
role
have 2 minutes to conclude.
it played a vital role in facilitating and institutionalizing this shift. The Quran helps solidify the patriarchal structure by aligning itself with the established and neighboring monotheistic traditions. These older traditions already affirm the worship of a god referred to by an exclusively male pronouns, and subjugation of women was often treated as part of the new accepted social and religious order. Since I don't have enough time, I pay attention you to the last page of my presentation. I had intended to demonstrate this methodological failure through an in-depth case study, but due to time constraints, I will forego that detailed examination here. Instead, I refer you to my recently published article. My analysis focused on the Quranic narrative of Mary, a figure often hailed as a key witness to female dignity in the text. His work highlights the brilliant intratextual dynamics of the Quran, showing how the Quran aligned itself with and reproduced the prevailing patriarchal trends of its time, not only through explicit legal injunction, but also through its subtle literary and rhetorical creativity in portraying the story of Mary. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zehra. Now I will invite Dr. Gulrukh Khan, Assistant Professor, Aligarh Muslim University, and her topic is Decolonizing Epistemologies, Reclaiming Women's Mystical Voices in the Medieval Islamic World. Dr. Gulrukh Khan. Dr. Gulrukh Khan, please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As a respected chair and the other dignitaries and my fellow colleagues, today I'm colonizing epistemologies, reclaiming. As we know that the study of women mistakes in Islam has often been framed through orientalistic or pietistic lenses, either romanticizing their devotion or erasing their intellectual labor. Decolonizing epistemology demands that we read these women not as anomalies, but as participants in a long tradition of theorizing about knowledge, ethics, and divine intimacy. This paper is a attempt that genealogy by situating female Sufi voices within both Islamic intellectual history and feminist philosophy. The figures such as Rabia al-Adwiya, Aisha al-Bonia, Jahara Begum, and Zebun Nisa, who we know by the name Makhfi, were not merely passive saints within Islamic piety, but active theorists of knowledge. Through their writings and lived practices, they challenged the patriarchal hierarchies by grounding spiritual authority in experience, love, and divine intimacy, what Sufism calls as marifa and ishq. The first section of my paper is reclaiming spiritual authority through epistemic justice. The history of women's engagement with Islamic knowledge has often been overshadowed by interpretive traditions that equated revelation with male authority. Yet, within these constraints, early women epistemic justice, the moral act of reclaiming one's right to be a knower. Through their poetry, prayer, and instruction, these women generated alternative frameworks of knowing that is grounded not in legal institutions or textual mastery, but in the direct experience of God. Their love, longing, and self annihilation, which is known by the word fana, became epistemic acts that destabilize hierarchies of male reason. To read them through Fricker's lens restores their voices as interpreters and theorists rather than devotional curiosities. They resisted testimonial injustice where women's credibility was discounted and hermeneutical injustice where their experiences lacked interpretive visibility. They, in response, forged a language of divine intimacy that made experience itself a legitimate source of knowledge. Having established how Quran mystics reclaimed authority within patriarchal settings, we can now trace how the Quran itself provides the theological foundations for such inclusivity. The Quran repeatedly affirms that piety and certainty, taqwa and yaqeen, not gender determine, not determine only gender, but it determines knowledge. Figures such as Maryam, Bilqis, Asiya, they embody what we might call feminine marifa, a knowing born of divine encounter rather than juridical training. Maryam's dialogues with angels or Hajar's discovery of the Zamzam spring reveal women as active participants in revelation. As scholars like Amina Wudud and Asma Barlas, they remind us the Quran's egalitarian ethos was gradually obscured by male-dominated exegesis. Thus, the task of Islamic feminism is not to import Western categories, but to recover the Quran's own inclusivity and unmask patriarchal monopolies within Islamic knowledge. Building on this scriptural foundation, Sufism emerged as the arena where that inclusivity found its most profound spiritual and epistemic expression. Moving forward to my another section, that is mystical knowledge as feminist epistemology. Within this Quranic horizon, Sufism offered women a vernacular space for knowing, a realm where inner experience could legitimate knowledge beyond institutional sanction. Rabia al-Adwiya, the 8th century saint of Basra, she epitomized this revolution. Her theology of pure love, worshipping God neither from fear nor hope, transformed devotion into a philosophy of relational intimacy. By refusing patronage and marriage, she enacted epistemic autonomy, living theology through radical self-sufficiency. Centuries later, Aisha al-Bunia of Damascus, among the few women to write extensively in Arabic on Sufi doctrine, claimed deliberative authority through scholarship itself. Her work fuses intellect and love, demonstrating that divine knowledge transcends gender. In Mughal India, Jahara Begum and Zebun Nisa imperial settings. Jahara's Munis al Arwa portrays her as a both disciple and a biographer of saints, while her endowments and charities materialize a theology of care. Her acts of patronage, from maintaining Sufi shrines to authenticating spiritual biographies, authoring them, inscribed women into the public archive of Islamic sanctity. Zebun Nisa, daughter of Aurangzeb, her poetic persona, Makhfi means the hidden one, was not a retreat into invisibility, but a strategy of epistemic wheeling. Through her Persian ghazals, she negotiated the tension between imperial surveillance and spiritual autonomy, re-signifying concealment as a mode of resistance. Like her contemporary Mirabai in Hindu Bhakti traditions, Zebun Nisa's inward mysticism articulated a politics of the self that transcends both patriarchal and imperial boundaries. Across these examples, women turned silence itself into articulation, what Christy Dodson calls epistemic agency, contributing to collective knowledge even under systemic silencing. Uh, Moving forward to the my fourth section, feminist epistemology meets Sufi hermeneutics, bringing feminist epistemology into dialogue with Sufi hermeneutics reveal a deep synergy. Feminist theory diagnoses women's exclusion from credible knowledge, while Sufism provides the spiritual technology for transcending it. Sufism distinguishes between ilm, that is discursive institutional learning, and marifa. Marifa is experiential, intuitive insight, where ilm was confined to the madrasa and the ulema. Marifa democratized access to the divine. The heart, not the intellect, became the seat of knowledge. This distinction unsettled that patriarchal authority. If truth is revealed through a kashf, that is unveiling, then an illiterate women and
Dr.
enslaved
Gulrukh,
mistake, yes,
you have 2 more minutes.
or a veiled princess could each become a knower. As Sadia Sheikh notes, Sufi metaphysics, especially in Ibn Arabi hierarchies, this meeting point between Sufi thought and feminist epistemology naturally extends into a broader decolonial critique of how modernity itself has policed knowing forms of knowing. Uh, Recovering these women's mystical voices is thus a decolonial act. Modern epistemologies shaped by colonial secularism have often dismissed spirituality, and such agency is not always resistance. It can also manifest as ethical attunement, humility, and disciplined self formation. The writings of these women constitute an indigenous feminist theory long before the term feminism existed, one that arises from within Islam's own spiritual grammar. By privileging marifa, ishq, and fana, they offered a theology of humility and love as epistemic virtues, countering both patriarchal and colonial hierarchies of knowledge. I would like to conclude with this, that the women as the theorist of epistemic justice, we restore a long silenced genealogy of feminist thought that is both deeply Islamic and profoundly universal. Their voices reminds us that feminism in Islam is not a modern import, but a spiritual inheritance rooted in marifa, ishq, and fana, in knowing through love, humility, and self-effacement. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gulrukh. Now I invite Dr. Talha Rahman, teacher, Amity Private School, Sharjah, and his topic is decolonizing Islamic tradition, Islamic feminism as epistemic and ethical renewal.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to all those present here. My paper, I have a PhD in Islamic studies, so my paper will be more inclined towards the textual sources of Islam. And primarily, this paper recognizes the varied contexts and positions within Islamic feminism and gender activism within various Islamic contexts, as well as other gender egalitarian positions within Islam. What I am trying to do in this paper is to survey the emerging academic scholarship, primarily on the Sunni texts, that suggest ways to rethink Islamic tradition. And the argument is that if we want to open up space for more egalitarian readings of, for example, Amina Wadud and other authors, then there is a need to rethink the Islamic tradition itself in order to accommodate them within the tradition. And why it is important and where it starts is a recognition of the crisis within the tradition, where Professor Kisha Ali has very nicely said in Sexual Ethics in Islam, her book. She says that although clearly unequal model of sexual ethics enshrined in the classical text no longer makes sense to a significant number of Muslims, nothing new has emerged to replace it. What she means by this will become more clear as we go through this presentation. But primarily, I want to focus on certain colonial binaries that have been imposed on Islamic law, particularly, but overall is all of the Islamic tradition, and which is creating obstacles to rethinking Islamic tradition for modern Muslims. The first binary that I would be talking about is the public-private divide, and then I will be going on to the male-female binary and tradition versus modernity. These are the focus of my paper, although there can be more binaries that we can talk about that have been artificially imposed. For example, the idea that there is a good Islam, like liberal Islam, and there is a bad Islam, which will be associated with terrorism, for example. So there are so many different binaries that have been imposed. But for the purpose of this paper, I will stick to these three. So talking about public and private binary, pre-modern Islamic law, pre-modern Islamic law allowed was an inclusive law. There were laws on transactions, contracts, governance, international relations, as well as family laws. But during the colonial period, it was somehow decided very arbitrarily that the laws relating to transactions, contracts, use of interest or usury riba, which is clearly prohibited in the Quran, all these things, they could be in these matters, the European standards or legal tradition could be imported and will be acceptable. But if we are talking about family laws, then only pre-modern Islamic law will be acceptable. And there was a process of codification, which means that individual rulings were taken out of their original context and applied to new situations. Then there was a gender binary, uh, and these binaries were overlapping with other binaries. For example, Muslim male was seen as exploitative and patriarchal, and Muslim women were seen as in need of protection. So and we see a continuation of this particular colonial logic in modern India as well, that we are going to protect Muslim women from Islam and from Muslim male. That idea is still out there and very much alive. So when Aisha S. Chaudhry studied domestic violence and Islamic tradition, she says, and she learned the entire Islamic tradition, the exegetical tradition and the legal tradition, and she came to the conclusion that the pre-modern authors were operating within a patriarchal cosmology where God was above the husbands and the wives were below them. But in the egalitarian cosmology, when she says a modern authors such as Amina Wadud, they come up with this new notion where men and women are equal, which is not found in the Quranic tafsir, which are pre-modern, or the legal literature. But Sadia Yaqub questions this very simplistic. She agrees with Aisha Chaudhry here, partially, but she says gender is not the only category that produced a differential legal subject. Rather, a legal subject could be free Muslim male as opposed to a non-elite male or a enslaved Muslim adult male. So there could be various kinds of legal subjects in pre-modern jurist vocabulary. Therefore, gender is only one of the categories of differential treatment in Islamic law. Although the cosmology of the pre-modern jurist is definitely hierarchical, but there are other categories in addition to gender. For example, age, social status, freedom or enslavement, a very important category as we shall see later on. And but what they identify, the gender is definitely one enduring category within the Islamic law, in that a slave person can be manumitted or become free over the time, or a minor can become an adult, but the category woman itself, it stuck there and it could not be changed. So comparison between marriage and slavery is provocative to Muslims today. But in the modern period, the Muslim jurist extensively, they made use of, they put marriage and concubinage side by side for various reasons. One of them was that these are the two institutions that made sex lawful. Out of these two institutions, any intercourse would be considered illegal. It would be considered zina, which would be um, uh, which would be punishable by corporal punishment, as we shall see later. But in this case, in both cases, what makes marriage, or what makes sex lawful, is the exclusive milk. The word used is milk, which means dominion of the husband over the husband or slave owner over that particular woman. In the wife's case, husband is not the owner of the wife, but only her sexual capacity. And in the case of the slave, the husband, the owner is the complete owner of the. So when it comes to cases of zina, Hina Azam has
Dr.
very
Salah, you have 2 minutes to conclude.
nicely shown in cases of in her book Sexual Violation in Islamic Law. It will become very clear that the pre-modern jurists did not recognize the sexual coercion as a violation of individuals' bodily autonomy. That is why they agreed on a monetary compensation to the victim, which in the case of the slave woman's rape would be the slave owner, because he is the one who won't be able to sell that slave for the price that was originally intended, because now the after the rape. So monetary compensation would be given to the slave owner in return for the monetary loss that he has faced. So these are some of the things that are unthinkable to us, that Kisha Ali identifies in her code there, that there is a different way of thinking about these things that was not available to the jurists in the classical period. So what were the Muslim jurists doing all this while? Were they misinterpreting the text? Were they trying to twisting Islam somehow to exploit women? What were they trying to do exactly? So the present scholarship that I'm surveying right now, that I have shown here, including Kishali, Judith Tucker, Zara Ayubi, Sadia Sheikh, Aisha Chaudhry, what they have shown is that there are certain ways of thinking about what it means to be male, what it means to be a female, how the society should function, their entire worldview that was available to them, and that allowed certain positions to be taken and certain other positions not to be taken for them. So it was impossible for them to come out of their times, as it is impossible for us to come out of our times and unthink the things that we now know, or consider to be like, for example, we will consider consent to be a very important criteria when we are talking whether about marriage or zina cases, but it was not the case uh, 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 in that time. So consent was primarily seen as just
Dr.
a
Kala, I
uh,
request you to conclude.
category to determine whether thank you category to determine whether the woman would be punished or not. So it will not do over to gloss over the patriarchal past. In fact, we have to go beyond the binary of tradition and modernity and think of Islam as a tradition, as a living tradition, and which can be reinterpreted by Muslims today, because Muslims in the previous times have interpreted, they have brought certain, certain lenses with which to read Quran and Hadith, and they are interpreting with those lenses. Therefore it is important for us to think of Islam as a living tradition that can be reformulated with the new frameworks that are available to us today. So that would with that I would like to conclude that we have to go beyond the binaries. We have to think of Islam as a living tradition to which we can bring our modern lenses and reinterpret legitimately. Uh, I think that
Thank you,
that's it.
Dr.
Thank
Talha,
you.
for that very intriguing session. I would now like to call upon our next speaker, who is Muhammad Aslam. He's a research scholar at Darul Huda Islamic University, and the title of his paper is Decolonizing Islamic Feminism, Epistemological Challenges and Ethical Possibilities.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am Muhammad Aslam from Darul Huda Islamic University, Kerala. Here I am discussing about my topic is decolonizing Islamic feminism, epistemological challenges and ethical possibilities. Firstly, as an introduction, I says the intersection of Islam, feminism, and decolonization as has garnered significant attention in contemporary academic discourse, offering new avenues for rethinking both gender and religious paradigm. Decolonizing Islamic feminism is an emerging field that seeks to challenge Western-centric feminist framework and reimaging feminist thought from an Islamic and post-colonial perspective. The need for a decolonized approach to Islamic feminism arises from the historical and ongoing colonial practices that have shaped the interpretation and practice of Islam, particularly with regard to women's role. While traditional Islamic feminism has emphasized the reinterpretations of religious text through a feminist lens, the decolonial turn seeks not only to challenge patriarchal structures but also to address the legacy of colonialism in shaping Islamic discourses on gender, power and sexuality. And I'm discussing about the historical context of decolonizing Islamic feminism. The historical trajectory of Islamic feminism and the movement of its decolonization is deeply intertwined with the legacies of colonialism, the intellectual history of Islamic reform, and the evolution of global feminist thought. During the colonial period, European power not only dominated Muslim majority societies politically and economically, but also sought to reshape their social and cultural institutions. Colonial administrators and missionaries often portrayed Muslim women as oppressed victims in need of Western liberation, using gender discourse as a tool to justify imperial domination. This colonial feminism epitomized by figures such as Lord Cromer in Egypt selectively invoked women's rights while undermining indigenous cultural and religious structures, creating a deep tension between feminism and Islamic identity in the colonial imagination. In response, early Muslim reformers and intellectuals such as Qasim Amin, Muhammad Abdu, and later figures like Fatima Mernissi engaged with the questions of women's status, education, and rights within an Islamic framework. Their works represented a complex negotiation between modernity and tradition, aiming to reinterpret Islamic sources in light of social justice while resisting the moral superiority claimed by Western modernity. However, as post-colonial nations emerged in the mid-20th century, many feminist movements in Muslim societies continued to grapple with the internalized colonial discourses and the dominance of Eurocentric paradigms in defining gender equality. The decolonization of Islamic feminism thus represents both an epistemic and ethical project. It seeks to reclaim interpretive authority. It means ijtihad from the colonial and patriarchal structure by grounding feminist thought within indigenous epistemologies and Islamic harmonies. This involves revisiting the classical texts, Quran, Hadith, and Fiqh through contextual and gender sensitive regarding that center justice and human dignity. At the same time, it challenges the universalities assumption of Western feminists and often ignore cultural specificity and spiritual dimensions of women's agency in Muslim societies. Now we are discussing about the epistemological challenges in decolonizing in Islamic feminism. The project of decolonizing Islamic feminism is deeply rooted in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, its production, validation, and dissemination. It entails a rigorous interrogation of how knowledge about Islam, gender, and feminism has historically been produced, and who voices have been privileged or marginalized in the process. At the core of the epistemological challenges lies in the necessity to dismantle Eurocentric paradigms and colonial epistemologies that have shaped the discourse on Muslim women, Islam, and feminist theory. These challenges are not merely academic but bear significant consequence for how Muslim women's identities, right, and spiritual agency are constructed and negotiated within both Islamic and global feminist contexts. The dominance of Western feminist epistemology, one of the most pressing epistemological challenges in decolonizing Islamic feminism, in confronting the universalist assumption of Western feminist thought. Mainstream feminist theory emerging primarily from European and North American context has often operated under the presumption that is framework for analyzing patriarchy, oppression, patriarchy, operation and liberation and universally applicable. This universalism has led to the marginalization or erasure of alternative feminist epistemologies that are rooted in non-Western traditions, including Islamic knowledge system, Mohandi, 1988, Western feminism has historically viewed religion, especially Islam, as inherently patriarchal and regressive. This
Aslam,
has
you
led
have
to
2 minutes to conclude.
the portrayal of Muslim women as passive victim of their religion in need of liberation of by secular or liberal feminist ideologies. Such an approach stems from secular liberal epistemologies that often reject a religious worldview as incompatible with feminist aim. However, for many Muslim women, their faith is not only central to the identity, but also a source of empowerment and moral agencies. Decolonizing Islamic feminism therefore involves challenging the epistemological supremacy of secular feminism and making space for religiously grounded feminist discourses. And the ethical possibility of decolonizing Islamic feminism. The ethic within the decolonization of Islamic feminism is not limited to research, ethics or normative moral codes. Rather, it opens a broader space for imagining relational, epistemic, and political commitments that challenge colonial, patriarchal, and secular liberal power structures. Decolonial Islamic feminist ethics does not seek to replicate Western feminist moral paradigms under new guises, but instead draws from Islamic ethical traditions, localized practice, and the lived moral reasoning of Muslim women. These ethical possibilities foster new way of knowing, being, and relating that are rooted in indigenous epistemologies, collective memory, and anti-oppressive paradigms. In conclusion, decolonizing Islamic feminism is not simply an intellectual exercise. It is a deeply ethical, political, and spiritual project that seeks to recover the autonomy of Muslim women in defining and pursuing gender justice on their own terms. This process demands an active confrontation with the epistemological dominance of Western secular liberal feminism, as well as the internal patriarchies embedded within traditional Islamic jurisprudence and social structures. It calls for a rethinking of knowledge, power, and ethic in ways that center the lived realities, interpretive capacities, and moral reasoning of Muslim
Aslam,
women
please
across
finish.
diverse cultural, linguistic, and spiritual contexts. And I conclude my word. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Aslam. I would now like to call upon our next speaker, who is Aishwarya Nanda, who is a scholar at Banaras Hindu University, and her title of the paper is Opanna as Decolonial Praxis: Muslim Women, Effective Labor, and Islamic Feminist Ethics in Kerala's Wedding Performance. Your time starts now, Aishwarya.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, one and all. Today, I will be presenting my paper titled Opena as Decolonial Praxis, Muslim Women, Effective Labor, and Islamic Feminist Ethics in Kerala's Wedding Performance. This presentation basically examines how Opena, a traditional Muslim woman's performance from Kerala, functions not only as a wedding ritual, but as a living decolonial feminist practice through which women express faith, community, and creativity. Opena is a performance deeply rooted in Kerala's Malabar Muslim community. It is usually performed during wedding ceremonies to celebrate the bride's arrival. The performance combines Mappalapaattu, songs that blend Arabic, Persian, and Malayalam with rhythmic clapping and synchronized gestures. Beyond entertainment, Opena creates a space of female sociability and emotional solidarity. It embodies collective joy and blessing while balancing Islamic modesty with aesthetic expression. My central claim is that Opena should be understood as a decolonial praxis, a performance where Muslim women enact ethical relations, transmit communal memory, and resist both colonial and patriarchal narratives. Historically, Opena evolved through the cultural exchange between Arab traders and local communities on the Malabar coast. These encounters produced a hybrid art form, Arab Malayalam in rhythm and spirit. Traditionally performed in the domestic courtyards, opera offered women a safe, sacred, and creative space. In this sense, opera preserves matrilineal traces of community and care passed down through generations of women. As colonial modernity and nationalism redefined art and religion, opera endured as an alternative space where women continued to express devotion and cultural identity. Basically, this study had four main objectives. One, to reframe opera as decolonial praxis, challenging Eurocentric definitions of art and aesthetics. To highlight effective labor, the emotional and spiritual work women invest in sustaining community. Then, to situate opera within Islamic feminist ethics, emphasizing faith as a source of agency. And to contribute to the broader discourse of decolonial aesthetics and embodied knowledge. Together, all these objectives reveal how opera as a living archive of women's ethical creativity is. I have chosen certain theoretical frameworks. For decolonial theory, I have analyzed Walter Mignolo and Rolando Vasquez. Mignola's idea of epistemic disobedience calls for delinking from Eurocentric knowledge systems. Here, opera's rhythms, gestures, and collective participation enact precisely such delinking value, emotion, faith, and embodiment over Western rationality. Then, Vasquez's notion of decolonial aesthetics focuses on how art from the global south resists colonial hierarchies of beauty. Then, opera's aesthetics is not visual spectacle but ethical beauty, what the performers describe as our hands claps to call blessings, not to entertain. This transforms art into an ethical communal act, not to product for consumption. Then, for Islamic feminism, I have chosen Leila Ahmad and Amina Wadud's ideologies. Here, Ahmad view critiques both Orientalist and patriarchal readings of Islam, showing that women's rituals often carry submersive meanings. Wadud reinterprets the Quran through gender inclusive ethics, highlighting beauty in contact and God consciousness as shared moral values. Through this lens, opera becomes an embodied form of Islamic ethics. The performers' modest costumes, poetic blessings, and graceful gestures reflects a harmony of faith, beauty, and agency. Thus, opera shows how Muslim women create art within and through faith, not in opposition to it. Then, for performance studies, Diana Taylor's concept of the repertoire sees performance as a living archive that preserves cultural memory. Similarly, Conquer Good's idea of co-performative witnessing emphasizes learning through participation and empathy. Here, opera operates as such a repertoire. Its gestures, rhythm, and collective emotion transmit knowledge across generations. By performing together, women remember through the body, teaching value of care, humility, and solidarity. Certain qualitative ethnographic methodology has been used for here. Fieldwork, semi-structured interviews, and discussions were conducted. As a whole, through this methodology, we'll understand opera not as a folklore but as a lived ethical practice. For the analysis and discussion part, I have concluded that opera has decolonial aesthetics. Opera's beauty lies in its ethical purpose, not in spectacle. The rhythmic clapping and collective singing represent epistemic disobedience, a refusal to define art through colonial or patriarchal norms. Here, beauty is related and spiritual, relational and spiritual. The joy of togetherness becomes a mode of resistance. By focusing on effect rather than form, opera asserts that knowledge and aesthetics are inseparable from emotion and ethics. Then, effective labor and Islamic feminist ethics, women's emotional and physical efforts in opera, learning songs, organizing performances, blessings the bride, constitute effective labor. This labor is rarely acknowledged but sustains community bond. One During my methodology, one participant told me that we learn opera from our mothers. It is not taught; it is felt. Such intergenerational transmission shows how emotion becomes a form of knowledge. Within Islamic ethics, this joyful participation transforms into spiritual authorship. Women perform faith through care and creativity. Then, negotiating the modernity. In urban contexts, opera now appears in stage competition and on social media. While some elders view this as commercialization, young performers see it as renewal. This tension illustrates Homi Bhabha's concept of hybridity, where culture survives by adaptation, not purity. Even in modern forms, opera retains its ethical and effective essence. It reminds us that decolonial resistance evolves. It transforms rather than isolates itself from change. Then, as a conclusion, to conclude, opera stands as a decolonial feminist praxis. It reclaims Muslim women's agency by merging art, spirituality, and ethics. Through rhythmic collectivity, Opena dealings from Eurocentric and patriarchal frameworks asserting alternative ways of knowing. Performance here become embodied theory, a living epistemology where women create, remember, and resist through the body. Opena thus teaches us that joy, care, and community can themselves be acts of political and spiritual resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwarya, and thank you for finishing it in record time. Our next speaker and the last speaker for the session is, if I think Dr. Farha has not joined us. Our next speaker is Amira Rahman and Ishika Sen. They are scholars from Manav Rachna University, and the title of their paper is Islamic Feminism and Decoloniality Towards Alternative Epistemologies, Ethics, and Modes of Praxis. Over to you, Amira, and your time starts now.
Thank you and good afternoon, all. Sorry, I'm outside. Uh, so, the topic of my paper is Islamic feminism and decoloniality towards alternative epistemologies, ethics, and modes of praxis. Critical reflection on gender as a category of analysis within the study of Islam is a venture fraught with intellectual and cultural challenges. Despite tacit acceptance of the analytical significance on gender, the intersection of these two categories has made for a highly charged thread of inquiry polarizing Muslim and other audiences over its commitments, practices, and impact. The field is also gendered, with most of its scholars being women. This is characteristics of women and gender studies at large and underlines its marginal epistemic and institutional status within various disciplines of the modern academy. While this is while this is while this is also true for a study of Islam and gender, other factors are also at play. Islam and gender scholarship is increasingly conducted by women who are Muslim or of a Muslim background. This has simultaneously mitigated and reproduced the modes of marginalized associated with women and gender studies. Intersectionality analysis of memoir centers on the intersections of race, class, gender, nationality, ethnicity, religion, and faith as sites of both oppression and privilege. A decolonial approach to reading memoir as a general allows to see the reality of lived experience, multiplicity of selves and contradictions as a site of critical and political inquiry. A decolonial approach is concerned with the corner of power, witness, and ecocentrism and the ways in which power attached to ecocentrism systems of thought and inquiry. I use these conceptual frameworks to look at the testimonial narratives of Iranian and Iraq Christian and Muslim women of color, first and second generations of migrants, claiming from different social locations. I critique too postmodern of postcolonial, postmodern, and postcolonial readings of the genre of memoir and argue for a realist post positivist reading of its genre. Consideration the epistemic value of lived experience, despite being conscious of the discursive formations of knowledge and the contradictions in experience itself. I argue that the minorities raise a lot of inquiries that are of epistemological and political identity. World traveling, homeland, and brotherhood, brotherland as traveling concepts in these narratives, showcasing examples from these writings to argue that instead of calling fragmented, we need to see their epistemic privilege, which results from their critical perspective to life. The critical phenomenological perspective is the result of adaptability strategies that they have to deploy as border crosses, newcomers, and people of color. Thus, not only should these narratives be intersectionality and in their context of production, but also in relation to other narratives. It is through the differences, self contradictions, and contradictions with mainstream knowledge that epistemic bodies are produced. After analyzing the multiplicity of selves and the concept of home, I demonstrate how to act of care, work as a feminist practice, emerge in the form of political participation from across the borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. With that, we have come to the end of our presentations. Uh, s- Doc- Dr. Shuja, would you like to present us with the remarks, or should we go into the Q&A and then we can take your remarks?
How the other sessions are going? I'm okay with both the options. If you want me to initiate the discussion, we will initiate, or else let's get the question first, and then I would uh, add my points. Whichever
Oh,
you
all right,
should
sir.
I begin?
I think so. We can take your remarks on the papers first,
All
and
right.
then we can go into the question and answers.
Yeah. Thank you. Uh, Thank you so much, Preeti. Let me first begin with the a big congratulations to Dr. Organizer, convener of this wonderful two-day international conference, Islamic Feminism, a very timely topic that Dr. Amina Hussain has taken, and also Professor Nishad Zaidi, madam, uh, and your entire team. I am also thankful to both of them for providing me the opportunity to get engaged intellectually with this most updated scholarship on this topic. Just I don't have many comments for all these presenters. Yes, those papers which were presented are absolutely remarkable. Uh, we could have given you more time, but due to this, lack of time, uh, we had to stick to 10 minutes, and you all did very well. But few points just to add to Zahra's paper, Dr. Zahra. It was indeed a wonderful paper, but um, just to add one suggestion about on the methodological part of your paper, that how are you going to stick to uh, particularly your research question, focusing on majorly to uh, Mary's, Mariam's episode in the Quran, or the overall, reflection of women in the, Quranic Quran as a text. So if that you could work on, that could be because I found that your major focus is slightly shifting to uh, Mary, which may reflect that you are working on Mary instead the where you begin with. So that's the only suggestion for you, Zohra. And Gulru Khan uh, has highlighted uh, the necessity of uh, moving beyond the Eurocentric, male-centric interpretation of the Islamic feminism. Uh, but while doing so, uh, while applying this decoloniality to the Islamic feminism, you to look at the debate within the decolonial perspective on the idea of indigeneity and the idea of pluriversality. These two uh, ideas, when you are applying to the Islamic feminist context, if you could see how this idea of indigenous Islamic feminism, how if you could elaborate more on this, because there is nothing called, yeah, how are we going to talk about this very idea of indigeneity? Because when we talk about decoloniality, we talk about indigeneity. So indigeneity means in which context? Is it Arab context? Is it Persian context? It's a South Asian context. So how are you going to define this? How are you going to apply this, the idea of decoloniality, while parallelly dealing with this idea of universality as well as the indigeneity? If you could focus on these things, I think that could be a good addition to your uh, reading, Sufi hermeneutics and all that through medieval age. Dr. Talha Rahman's paper on decolonizing Islamic tradition, she has come up with a very important reading of how Islamic laws are made and how there are some imprints of Western binaries and etc. But while doing so, I wanted you to give, you mentioned about tafsir. So you presented very well, but if you could have mentioned specifically with few examples, like which, whose tafsir? There are so many Quranic tafsirs. So if you could have justified your argument with specific examples, that would have enriched your presentation. And I'm sure you must have covered that part, or maybe due to some, paucity of time, you may not have been able to present those or to trace those examples. But if you could, if not, if you could add those things, it could be a wonderful paper and a very um, interesting. But to add one thing just to ignite your mind or just to brainstorm this debate on your analogy on patriarchal cosmology and the egalitarian cosmology. So when you say egalitarian, while deconstructing the male centric patriarchal cosmology to the egalitarian, I don't know why do I have reservation about this egalitarianism, because I must have read it in the context of Western intellectual tradition. So I have this distance from this idea. Instead, egalitarian. Why don't you say Islamic cosmology? Because this is how it begins. This is how, because because it's Islamic, but your counter argument is on patriarchy. So going back to the roots, that is the very Islamic cosmology. Islamic is not patriarchal. So you don't have to, subscribe to the such. This is my personal opinion. You may respond to, or let's. That's what I said. Just to ignite, just to brainstorm and debate on this topic. I'm mentioning this instead of egalitarian. You may mention it as a Islamic cosmology, because we are going back to
What
Islamic,
you're
from
not
where
saying.
this. Yes, Amini, Dr. Amini, you want to say something? Yeah. So sorry. Uh, and one more thing. Often we see that the fatwas are coming. The Islam. If you look at the Islamic jurisprudence, we often come across the. Am I audible,
Yes, sir.
Priti? Yeah. If we often see the Islamic jurisprudence and the fatwas that are coming, they are mostly coming from the male muftis. So that's even if today, but then if you see the initial phase of Islamic jurisprudence, there were many sahibas, not sahabas, who were parallelly giving similar kind of, opinions, legal opinions through Islamic of view to male sahabas, to the Islamic muftis over a period of time, which has predominantly led to the male centric Islamic jurisprudence even today. There are very few female muftis who are coming up with such kind of, opinions. So I think this absence, you need, if you could work on this, so it could be more engaging and critically engaging. Muhammad Aslam, I think your paper was nice, but I wanted you to uh, stick to or to identify what was what. I know it was more like I found it more like a survey paper, and why did I find it? Because I did you have not specifically mentioned any example or a data. For example, I know it's very difficult when we talk about data in this humanities, but yes, you have to talk about it. You have to say, okay, I've taken these text, or these are the reference point, these are the examples. If you could mention this will be a very good paper. And while doing so, it may be applicable to most of the young learners like you. You have to do some kind of brief review of literature. And how do you do the review of literature? Not just on Islamic feminism. Yeah, this is one step of doing review of literature, but then coming to a very narrow and focused review of literature. Often what happened, we assume that we did some review of literature while reading few canonical texts on Islamic feminism. But then this is okay. This is just to begin with. This is just to start with. But then you have to go to very specific and focused study that you are going to deal with, to find out whether there is even a single paper which is published on the similar theme, then find out the research gap and work on it. I think this will add a wonderful, uh, methodological, backup to your paper. I hope you will like it, and I'm sure you will incorporate. Aishwarya, yes, I think this is another interesting paper because yeah, it's a intellectually very sound. The entire panel was wonderful, and very new topics that you have come up with. Yeah, Opana is something like we have. See, in India, we have so many wedding songs, right? Including our Hindu traditions, or if you see our other, tribal traditions. But when it comes to Opana within the Islamic, feminist context, how women's are trying to preserve this, feminist space within the male dominated society. You must have heard this work of, Shireen Kudirikkal. She tried to work on this, how women's are considering this opana as a resistance to against the male space, how they are creating their own space. But interestingly, when it comes to more close reading of opana, I want you to look at how this opana is being understood, how it is being perceived within the Mapidas of Kerala. Mapidas in the Malabar region. Go to Malabar region and see how different sects, because it's not a uniform Muslim community. There are so many sects within the Mapidas. So how this sectarian understanding perceive this, cultural uh, performance, the oral cultural performance of this. Because see, I will give you one example, because I was in Hyderabad during my PhD days, and there was I wanted to work on Dholak ke Geet in the Deccan region, uh, starting from Hyderabad to Aurangabad. And those were very famous, and Dholak ke Geet were often also played during the time of, marriages. So I went to Charminar, and because there are so many bookshops, and I asked a shopkeeper, "Mujhe, I need Dholak collection of Dholak ke Geet. I'm sure there must be some collection." He said, "क्यों चाहिए ये?" I said, we want to write a research paper, research करना है इस पे, क्यों और दूसरा टॉपिक नहीं मिला क्या आपको? That was his response. He said, did you not find any other topic? I said, what's the problem with this? अरे जाओ ढोलक बीला क्या रहता बोले ये. But then I realized that how people are perceiving a different community people, because if you go to some other community, they would appreciate this. And some people may say, oh, yeah, what kind of these things they're talking about? So it also depends. So close reading to this opana would also may add some kind of critical understanding. I know it's a wonderful paper. All the papers are were wonderful. So that's the only thing that I wanted to tell you, that how this dance, and moreover it's about dance too. It's also about performance, it's also about orality, it's also about poetry, it's also about music too sometimes. So while dealing with these contested topic within the Islamic framework, you please try to see how the sections, as well as how it is being justified going back to the performance during the very time of prophet, the daf, the music, how they have been, and the performance, the welcome songs that the ansars, when prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina, how they sang this similar kind of you know poetry, or nazm, etc. So is Opama is a similar kind of oral tradition. So how do they justify it? How do they reject this? I think those things may be useful. This was the only from my side. Thank you so much. If you have anything or any clarification, or if you like any comment, if you disagree, you should always respond to this. And this was from my side, Dr. Priya. Uh, if any presenter wants to respond to, please, you're most welcome. Or else we'll go for the Q&A session. I think there are few questions in the chat box, or the floor is open for Q&A session. Thank you.
Does any of the presenter want to respond to sir's comments?
Yeah.
You can unmute yourself and you can respond.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir. Those comments were definitely very um, useful. I've already responded. So, what I have resisted a little bit, in fact, what I would like to resist is claiming that Islam says, and whatever the content of the Islam says on particular subject, because when we say that Islam says, then we assume that we already know what Islam says, and we assume a lot of other things about Islam.
Mm.
For example, that Islam is out there, given, fixed, ready to be discovered. And then we say this is what Islam says. And when somebody disagrees with our position, then we say that that is not what Islam says. You are being un-Islamic, or something like that. So what I have suggested instead is this idea of Islam, where we can see where we can see that Islamic tradition as a whole, it has different parts. And so the idea of transcendental Islam is actually ahistorical, as in we all consider ourselves to be Muslims, but what it actually means to be Muslim is different for every individual and different communities. What can be discussed is the texts which are there, the lived experiences of the people, and what we consider as normative. And therefore, I find Talal Asad's idea of a discursive tradition, which is reformulating right now as we speak, very, very important in thinking about Islamic tradition. That's all that I would like to say. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Tala. Yeah.
Sir, I wasn't able to take your comments. That time you were not to me, so I would like to have that comments if you can repeat two or three out of them.
For Gulrukhan.
Yes.
Okay. Just a minute.
May I just intervene? We also have to keep track of time. And I think Dr.
Yeah.
Shuja has been very generous with his comments, and
Yeah, no,
really,
it's okay. I wasn't able to, so I would like to have the recording because I couldn't
yeah, of course,
listen.
everything is
Thank you,
recorded.
thank you,
This
thank
will,
you.
you will find this. And if there's any question, then we can have a Q&A. And if anyone wants to
You are mute, Amina.
Sorry.
Dr. Ram.
So yes, I just wanted to say that everything is on record.
I just wanted to say something. Can I begin with it?
Yeah, please go ahead, Alisha. You want to say something?
Okay. So yes, sir. It's not a. It is not a question. It is more like a reflection on what the last presenter just spoken about. See, I just wanted to say that there is this demarcation between Islam and Muslims, right? Wherein when we are talking about Islamic feminism in entirety, and then we are demarcating it with Muslim feminism. So it is not what Islam is talking about or what Muslims are doing on ground. So my reflection over this point is that this is wherein the feminist interpretation of the feminist interpretation of Quran comes into the picture, because as Amina Wadud has also quoted that traditional tafsir has exclusively written by men. So the question, like, this is wherein we need to work upon, right? So it is not all about what the lived experiences for these particular women are, right? So this is what I just wanted to say, like, from my own reflection. So I think this, you just consider it with your own points and reflections which you have already spoken about.
Thank you, Alicia. We have a few questions in the chat box, so we'll go ahead with that. Uh, so the first question is to Aishwarya. She has responded in the comment box, and it's a question by me. So I did not get the answer in the comment box. So basically, what I wanted to ask you was, you talk about the spirituality and the non-performativeness of the Oparna. And as Dr. Shuja also mentioned, that since it is a performance, there has to be a sense of performativity to it. And you also mentioned that the elders of the community have a certain, they're reluctant towards this performativity, and then you mentioned that it is now being performed so that people become aware of this particular culture. I want to know your own view on this performativeness of this particular openna, where it is out and open. So if you could shed some light on that. Uh, Aishwarya, are you there? I think Aishwarya has left the meeting.
If we don't have anyone to respond, then I think we can come to the close of the session. And I just want to say one more thing, since we're just discussing about the feminist interpretation of Quran. So our next plenary is Professor Asma Asfuruddin, who should be, she would be specifically, in fact, her title is the feminist, looking at the Quran from the feminist lens. So I would invite you, all of you, to please join that session also at 4:30.
What time?
It's
What
at
time it is?
4:30. It's at
4:30.
4:30, so we
Yeah.
are wrapping up. So we will have a
Excuse
half.
me,
Just
excuse
let
me,
me
With the
respond
same
to
link, right?
Yes,
Gulrukh
the link
Khan.
excuse
for
me. There is a
all
question.
the,
There is
the
question to me as well.
Dr. Gulrukh Khan.
Yeah, there is a question to me. I think by Preeti Maurya itself. If I'm not wrong, I would like to answer that if I have time.
okay, I think another 2 minutes
Am I audible?
we will wrap up.
Yeah.
This probably
She's
would be the
asking
last
about the
question.
self.
Last question. Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Gulrukh.
Yeah,
Yeah, this
thank
would be
you.
the last question.
She's He's asking about the self. In Sufi thought, the self is nafs, that is not a static ego, but a soul in motion, a field of transformation that moves from desire to divine tranquility. And the Quran itself recognizes the self. The Quranic philosophy, psychology, in fact, grounds the Sufi conviction that true knowledge lies in self purification. He who purifies the soul succeed, and who corrupts it fails. So for women mystics, this opened a radical space of subjectivity, one rooted not in obedience to man, but in intimacy with the God. For example, in my case, I have the example of Rabia al-Adwiya, who turned selfhood into an act of pure love, worshipping God for his essence alone, not out of fear or hope. Aisha al-Budniya intellectualized the self, fusing scholarship and devotion to show that divine knowledge transcended. At the same time, we have the example of Johara and Nisa writing from within imperial secularism, transforming introspection into sovereignty. They're making the inner self a site of fear. So, in the both the Quran and the Sufism, the self is not erased, but it is refined, and through that refinement, these women claimed a part of inner authority that challenge the patriarchal definitions of knowledge and power. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Gulrukh, for that. With that, we have come to the end of our session. I would now like to present a formal vote of thanks. First and foremost, I extend our deepest gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mazhar Asif, and our Registrar of Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Mahtab Alam Rizvi, for their wholehearted support. A heartfelt thanks to our distinguished chair, Dr. Shajauddin Chapparban, for his very extensive and very intriguing and insightful perspectives. I also would like to thank all the participants without whom the event would not be a success. At last but not the least, my gratitude goes out to the entire organizing team and volunteers whose commitment and tireless efforts have ensured the seamless execution of this program. Thank you, everyone, and please join us at 4:30 for our plenary speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We will disperse briefly and we'll rejoin at 4:30. Thank you.